Trump has thrown Canada into a complete identity crisis by suggesting it should become America's 51st state. And what's even crazier is that nearly half of Canadians aged 35 and younger agree with this concept, while only 17% of the older generations approve of it. But what does this mean about where we see ourselves going? And what if the future of belonging isn't about which country you belong to, but whether or not it even matters? Today, I want to dive into a range of surprising opinions and kick off a conversation with you guys, not just about the future of Canada, but about whether the nation state is an idea whose time has run out. Let's dive into it. So for those of you watching, or for those of you who are not super political or not active on social media, you might not understand just how crazy this Canada 51st state war has gotten. We've seen grocery stores and different types of retailers marketing towards Canadian to buying Canadian stuff. We've seen election shifts like you wouldn't believe. And we've even seen less border traffic, less people traveling to the United States over the last couple of weeks. And Ipsos did this poll where they said 4 in 10, 43% of Canadians aged 18 to 34 would vote to be an American citizen if they converted all of assets to USD was guaranteed. Guys, this is the younger generation screaming for some economic certainty. This is a massive caveat. Obviously, our Canadian dollar has sunk. That's not good. That's not good for a younger generation who's looking to maybe start a family. When you do not have economic certainty, it is very, very difficult to think about having a good, long, prosperous life in this nation. And so it's not surprising to me that they're kind of single track minded. This is the problem with the fiat system, first and foremost, but I digress. We're talking about that today. Today, I want to understand what some of the opinions are around the nation state in general.
This hour from the White House, where President Donald Trump was just asked about his so-called 51st state threats. Listen to this.
They told me there is a path. Alberta is first, and if they sign on, Saskatchewan would follow, and then you go west to British Columbia. There is a movement in Canada to join us. I want to get your thoughts on that and how that's proceeding right now.
So it's true. Thank you, Brian. It's true. A lot of people in Canada are liking becoming our beautiful, cherished 51st state. They'll have to pay much lower taxes. They'll have the ultimate security. You know, they don't pay very much for security right now because they rely on us, which is really unfair to us. They make cars that we could make, and they send them back into the United States. They make a lot of things, including the sending of oil and everything. We don't need their oil. We don't need their lumber. In fact, we're going to be...
Just a tiny fact check there. Most recent polling shows about 7 in 10 Canadians are, in fact, not open to the idea of joining the United States.
I love the polls. Like, we just showed you a poll that said 43% of young Canadians are. She's saying 7 out of 10 Canadians. Honestly, I think polls should just be taken with a grain of salt at the best of times. But to the reporter's point, or whoever's asking Trump and teeing Trump up here, he's not wrong. There is a movement, a growing movement of people kind of saying, hey, I'm sick and fed up with some of the federal garbage that Canada has gone through over the last couple of years, specifically since 2020, since the pandemic. Things have not been great. The Liberal Party has been in decline. I do not think that we are going to see a good outcome in the election coming up. There's supposed to be an election called any day now. I don't think it's going to be a positive outcome for Canadians. I have never felt in my adult or even in my younger life when Canadians have been so divided, and it feels like East and West is an easy way to categorize this. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, is Canada too big? Are we too diverse? Is there too much differing of opinions within the geographies that exist? The west of Canada is completely different from the east of Canada, both from a geography standpoint, from even an education standpoint, from the standpoint of professional, what people do for a living. It is like two different countries all under one ruler. I would support the annexation of Western Canada. So notably, Canada would get smaller, US would look like this, and then Canada would remain up here. Alberta and Saskatchewan understand that Americans have always been more their countrymen than Eastern Canadian. Back to what I was saying, Eastern and Western Canadian kind of having two different cultures. Interior BC would likely join as well, excluding Vancouver. Trump should offer a proposal to Western Canadians. This is the most popular narrative that I have seen around this subject. As a whole, the interior BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. It's heavy oil, it's heavy lumber. If you include Manitoba in that, there's some fresh water in the Hudson's Bay. We kind of look like the makings of a really, really good sovereign nation. I think between those three parties, there'd be about 5, 6, maybe 7 million people. A pretty small amount if you consider how much land mass there is. Frankly, I do think there's a little bit of a split, a little bit of a divide happening where that kind of bulk, maybe what's that, a third of Canada's land, and probably about, a quarter or a little bit less than a quarter of Canada's population probably would be interested in splitting and going to either be part of USA, whether through annexation or even just separating, kind of in the same way that Quebec did many, many years ago, where they're like a little mini sovereign nation inside of Canada.
What do you make of this, the thing President Trump has been repeatedly talking about Canada as a future 51st state? What do you think about that?
Trump is preparing to renegotiate a whole series of international agreements, and he's doing what he usually does, which is to push for advantage hard and see what happens, and to establish, what would you say, an anchor that is beyond even what he might hope to achieve.
So an anchor here, this is a popular negotiating tactic. When you're anchoring someone, you're trying to set a price, set a term so egregious that when you come off that term to something that would have otherwise been a high term, it looks like a favor. Another way to look at this is like the Overton window. So a good example of anchoring would be if you've got a car for sale for $10,000 and I want to buy it, and I come in and say, yo, I'll give you $5,000. And you're like, oh, I can't take $5,000, blah, 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 but I'll do $7,500. That is an awesome deal. 25% discount from $10,000 to $7,500 because I've anchored you so low. And so in this case, what Peterson's suggesting here is that Trump is anchoring Canadians, a very, very high demand. Yo, I'm taking over your entire nation. I'm taking all your land. You're gonna be part of America. You're ours. So that when these international agreements kind of get redone and reworked, the terms don't have to be so crazy, but anything that's backed off from and you guys can remain a nation state is going to look like a massive benefit to them. Trump, I think, he obviously has an ego when he's negotiating, but I think he's going to play into the ego of whoever the prime minister is in Canada and give them the ability to say, and I saved us from not going to be American, when in reality, they're going to get a much worse deal because the anchoring was set so high. And then, of course, the media and the clickbait, and all the videos about this topic just go and play into his frenzy.
So that he can achieve half of that and be thrilled about it. He's very good at that. And I think Trump also floats these propositions as a trial balloon. He's obviously a guy who's willing to see what'll happen. And so he likes to stir the pot. And he's doing that very effectively at the moment in relationship to Canada and Greenland and Panama and Mexico.
Basically every single nation touching the USA. Yeah. Trump's going full expansion. I'm not sure if you've ever played Risk as a kid, but this is like full on attack, see what sticks, see where the lowest path for the most return is going to be, and then focus on that one. This is a classic business move that frankly, we haven't seen in politics in very long because we don't have businessmen running the country. We've got politicians running the country. And now we have an old president who's on his last term who's going out trying to leave a legacy. And here we go. On Peterson's video, we see first-class citizen with a reservation for a lifeboat saying, don't worry, the iceberg over there looks tiny. How do I answer this question without losing my Patreon subscribers? People accusing Peterson here of just kind of fluffing it off and not really having an opinion, but I actually think this is a really good opinion. I think it's deep, it's insightful, it's showcasing how Trump's mind works. It doesn't really touch on, what it means for Canadians. I think the earlier video, we kind of talked about that already, but I think it's good insight into how Trump works. And so all this comes back to, so what? So whether you're an American or you're a Canadian, that's the majority of people that watch this, drop me a comment down below, let me know where you're tuning in from. I personally am starting to feel like it doesn't matter much at all. I think if you went out into the street in any city in Canada, and especially major urban cities in Canada, and asked 10 people, what does it mean to be Canadian? I do not think you would get the same answer. And I would hazard a guess that's the same thing in most EU countries and probably even in America. So what does that mean? So if I had to guess how I see this concept of a nation state emerging or being in the future, I actually do believe that as people start to, wake up to the corruption, as people start to figure out that the world is borderless, and as people start to crave community, because I think that most people today are craving community, we're going to find it in smaller nation-state-esque communities. And there's going to be little pockets of sovereign individuals, of sovereign communities popping up all over the world. Maybe even businesses. There's one in Honduras called Prospera. Little pockets where, local governments are going to give them a treaty, give them kind of the opportunity to be a little sovereign nation inside the broader nation for a fee, and people will set up little sovereign communities in that area. I kind of think that's a good thing. I kind of think that gives people more choice. It diversifies. Right now, really the G7, even on the macro level, kind of acts as one big group anyways. They kind of act as one big governing body. What happens in the EU often happens in Canada later on. We've got bad banking in the EU and in the UK, and look at what do you know? We've got bad banking over here in Canada now. We got bad healthcare over in the UK. What do you know? We got bad healthcare here in Canada now. So I feel like we've seen the world get tighter and tighter and tighter, more uniform, maybe more globalist, under a globalist vision. And I think we're starting to see the world, society, the individuals crave for community, crave for kind of the rise of the sovereign individual, crave for some individual principles. But I want to hear from you. I'm talking about 10, 20, 30, 50 years away. When I'm old and gray and I got grandkids taking my Bitcoin, what is your 50-year outlook on Canada? Are we going to survive as one big, massive nation, or do we split? Does the West annex? Is it just Alberta that separates? Do we just stay as a little treaty, kind of like Quebec has? Does the whole thing get gobbled up by the US? This is a really interesting time in history. We haven't seen this much turmoil since probably 100 years ago when all the world wars were going on. And so what does the outcome of this turbulent and volatile time look like? And are you worried or are you excited for your future? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, stay sovereign.